Hello there, and welcome to this reading of Twilight Eclipse with relaxing rain sounds in the background to help you get down to sleep. The series continues with part 6 tonight. I hope that you're enjoying it. It's here for you for free to help you sleep, so please do hit like and subscribe for more free audiobooks. If you'd like to say thanks whilst getting awesome rewards like hearing the rest of this book immediately, right this second, and getting at least 2 readings every week to help you get down to sleep, come and join me at patreon.com/downtosleep. That is the best place to listen to the podcast. You get more than 450 episodes right now, including lots of books that I can no longer share here on YouTube. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here. Please do hit that like and subscribe. Let me know that you're still enjoying this series in a comment below. I read all of the comments, and it means a lot to know that you're enjoying this and that it's helping. So thank you. Let's go ahead and tuck you in. Take a nice deep breath for me, and let's get down to sleep. Eclipse by Stephanie Meyer. I watched the edge of the forest where Jacob had vanished, leaning into Edward's side again. I was on the point of collapse, but I was fighting it. Jacob loped back into view, on 2 legs this time. His broad chest was bare, his hair tangled and shaggy. He wore only a pair of black sweatpants, his feet bare to the cold ground. He was alone now, but I suspected that his friends lingered in the trees, invisible. It didn't take him long to cross the field, though he gave a wide berth to the Cullens, who stood talking quietly in a loose circle. "Okay, bloodsucker," Jacob said when he was a few feet from us, evidently continuing the conversation I'd missed. "What's so complicated about it?" "I have to consider every possibility," Edward said, unruffled. "What if someone gets by you?" Jacob snorted at that idea. "Okay, so leave her on the reservation. We're making Colin and Brady stay behind anyway. She'll be safe there." I scowled. "Are you talking about me?" "I just want to know what he plans to do with you during the fight," Jacob explained. "Do with me?" "You can't stay in Forks, Bella." Edward's voice was pacifying. "They know where to look for you there. What if someone slipped by us?" My stomach dropped and the blood drained from my face. "Charlie?" I gasped. "He'll be with Billy," Jacob assured me quickly. "If my dad has to commit a murder to get him there, he'll do it. Probably won't even take that much. It's Saturday, right? There's a game." "This Saturday?" I asked, my head spinning. I was too light-headed to control my wildly random thoughts. I frowned at Edward. "Well, crap, there goes your graduation present." Edward laughed. "It's the thought that counts," he reminded me. "You can give the tickets to someone else." Inspiration came swiftly. "Angela and Ben," I decided at once. "At least that'll get them out of town." He touched my cheek. "You can't evacuate everyone," he said in a gentle voice. "Hiding you is just a precaution. I told you, we'll have no problem now. There won't be enough of them to keep us entertained." "But what about keeping her in the push?" Jacob interjected, impatient. "She's been back and forth too much," Edward said. "She's left trails all over the place. Alice only sees very young vampires coming on the hunt, but obviously someone created them. There is someone more experienced behind this. Whoever he..." Edward paused to look at me. "Or she is. This could all be a distraction. Alice will see if he decides to look himself, but we could be very busy at the time that decision is made. Maybe someone's counting on that. I can't leave her somewhere she's been frequently. She has to be hard to find, just in case. It's a very long shot, but I'm not taking chances." I stared at Edward as he explained, my forehead creasing. He patted my arm. "Just being overcautious," he promised. Jacob gestured to the deep forest east of us, to the vast expanse of the Olympic Mountains. So hide her here, he suggested. There's a million possibilities. Places either one of us could be in just a few minutes if there's a need. Edward shook his head. Her scent is too strong and, combined with mine, especially distinct. Even if I carried her, it would leave a trail. Our trace is all over the range. But in conjunction with Bella's scent, it would catch their attention. We're not sure exactly which path they'll take, because they don't know yet. If they crossed her scent before they found us. Both of them grimaced at the same time, their eyebrows pulling together. There has to be a way to make it work, Jacob muttered. He glared toward the forest, pursing his lips. I swayed on my feet. Edward put his arm around my waist, pulling me closer and supporting my weight. I need to get you home. You're exhausted. Charlie will be waking up soon. Wait a sec, Jacob said, wheeling back to us, his eyes bright. My scent disgusts you, right? Not bad. Edward was 2 steps ahead. It's possible. He turned toward his family. Jasper, he called. Jasper looked up curiously. He walked over with Alice a half step behind. Her face was frustrated again. Okay, Jacob. Edward nodded at him. Jacob turned toward me with a strange mixture of emotion on his face. He was clearly excited by whatever this new plan of his was, but he was also still uneasy, so close to his enemy allies. And then it was my turn to be wary, as he held his arms out toward me. Edward took a deep breath. We're going to see if I can confuse the scent enough to hide your trail, Jacob explained. I stared at his open arms suspiciously. You're going to have to let him carry you, Bella, Edward told me. His voice was calm, but I could hear the subdued distaste. I frowned. Jacob rolled his eyes, impatient, and reached down to yank me up into his arms. Don't be such a baby, he muttered, but his eyes flickered to Edward, just like mine did. Edward's face was composed and smooth. He spoke to Jasper. Bella's scent is so much more potent to me. I thought it would be a fairer test if someone else tried. Jacob turned away from them and paced swiftly into the woods. I didn't say anything as the dark closed around us. I was pouting, uncomfortable in Jacob's arms. It felt too intimate to me. Surely he didn't need to hold me quite so tightly, and I couldn't help but wonder what it felt like to him. It reminded me of my last afternoon in the push, and I didn't want to think about that. I folded my arms, annoyed when the brace on my hand intensified the memory. We didn't go far. He made a wide arc and came back into the clearing from a different direction, maybe half a football field away from our original departure point. Edward was there alone, and Jacob headed toward him. You can put me down now. I don't want to take a chance to messing up the experiment. His walk slowed and his arms tightened. You are so annoying. Thanks. Out of nowhere, Jasper and Alice stood beside Edward. Jacob took one more step, and then set me down a half a dozen feet from Edward. Without looking back at Jacob, I walked to Edward's side and took his hand. Well, I asked. As long as you don't touch anything, Bella. I can't imagine someone sticking their nose close enough to that trail to catch your scent, Jasper said, grimacing. It was almost completely obscured. A definite success, Alice agreed, wrinkling her nose. And it gave me an idea. Which will work, Alice added confidently. Clever, Edward agreed. How do you stand that? Jacob muttered to me. Edward ignored Jacob and looked at me while he explained. You're going to leave a false trail to the clearing, Bella. The newborns are hunting. Your scent will excite them, and they'll come exactly the way we want them to, without being careful about it. Alice can already see that this will work. When they catch our scent, they'll split up and try and come at us from two sides. Half will go through the forest, where her vision suddenly disappears. Yes, Jacob hissed. Edward smiled at him, a smile of true comradeship. I felt sick. How could they be so eager for this? How could I stand having both of them in danger? I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not a chance, Edward said suddenly, his voice disgusted. It made me jump, worrying he'd somehow heard my resolve, but his eyes were on Jasper. I know, Jasper said quickly. I didn't even consider it, not really. Alice stepped on his foot. If Bella was actually there in the clearing, Jasper explained to her, it would drive them insane. They wouldn't be able to concentrate on anything but her. It would make picking them off truly easy. Edward's glare had Jasper backtracking. Of course, it's too dangerous for her. It was just an errant thought, he said quickly. But he looked at me from the corner of his eyes, and the look was wistful. No, Edward said. His voice rang with finality. You're right, Jasper said. He took Alice's hand and started back to the others. Best 2 out of 3, I heard him ask her as they went to practice again. Jacob stared after him in disgust. Jasper looks at things from a military perspective, Edward quietly defended his brother. He looks at all the options. It's thoroughness, not callousness. Jacob snorted. He'd edged closer unconsciously, drawn by his absorption in the planning. He stood only 3 feet from Edward now, and standing there between them I could feel the physical tension. It was like static, an uncomfortable charge. Edward got back to business. I'll bring her here Friday afternoon to lay the false trail. You can meet us afterward and carry her to a place I know, completely out of the way, easily defensible. Not that it will come to that. I'll take another route there. And then what? Leave her with a cell phone? Jacob asked critically. You have a better idea. Jacob was suddenly smug. Actually, I do. Oh. Again, dog. Not bad at all. Jacob turned to me quickly, as if determined to play the good guy by keeping me in the conversation. We tried to talk Seth into staying behind with the younger 2. He's still too young, but he's stubborn and he's resisting, so I thought of a new assignment for him. Cell phone. I tried to look like I got it. No one was fooled. As long as Seth Clearwater is in his wolf form, he'll be connected to the pack, Edward said. Distance isn't a problem, he added, turning to Jacob. Nope. 300 miles. It's impressive. Jacob was the good guy again. It's the farthest we've ever gone to experiment. Still clear as a bell. I nodded absently. I was reeling from the idea that little Seth Clearwater was already a werewolf too, and that made it difficult to concentrate. I could see his bright smile, so much like a younger Jacob in my head. He couldn't be more than 15, if he was even that. His enthusiasm at the council meeting bonfire suddenly took on new meaning. It's a good idea. Edward seemed reluctant to admit this. I'll feel better with Seth there, even without the instantaneous communication. I don't know if I'd be able to leave Bella there alone. To think it's come to this, though, trusting werewolves. fighting with vampires instead of against them. Jacob mirrored Edward's tone of disgust. Well, you still get to fight against some of them, Edward said. Jacob smiled. That's the reason we're here. Edward carried me home in his arms, expecting that I wouldn't be able to hang on. I must have fallen asleep on the way. When I woke up, I was in my bed, and the dull light coming through my windows slanted in from a strange angle, almost like it was afternoon. I yawned and stretched, my fingers searching for him and coming up empty. Edward, I mumbled. My seeking fingers encountered something cool and smooth. His hand. Are you really awake this time? He murmured. I sighed in assent. Have there been a lot of false alarms? You've been very restless, talking all day. All day? I blinked and looked at the windows again. You had a long night. You'd earned a day in bed. I sat up and my head spun. The light was coming in my window from the west. Wow. Hungry? He guessed. Do you want breakfast in bed? I'll get it, I groaned, stretching again. I need to get up and move around. He held my hand on the way to the kitchen, eyeing me carefully like I might fall over. Or maybe he thought I was sleepwalking. I kept it simple, throwing a couple of Pop-Tarts in the toaster. I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflective chrome. I'm a mess. It was a long night, he said again. You should have stayed here and slept. Right, and missed everything. You know you need to start accepting the fact that I'm part of the family now. He smiled. I could probably get used to that idea. I sat down with my breakfast and he sat next to me. When I lifted the Pop-Tart to take the first bite, I noticed him staring at my hand. I looked down and saw that I was still wearing the gift that Jacob had given me at the party. May I? He asked, reaching for the tiny wooden wolf. I swallowed noisily. Sure. He moved his hand under the charm bracelet and balanced the little figurine in his snowy palm. For a fleeting moment, I was afraid. Just the slightest twist of his fingers could crush it into splinters. But of course, Edward wouldn't do that. I was embarrassed I'd even had the thought. He only weighed the wolf in his palm for a moment, and then let it fall. It swung lightly from my wrist. I tried to read the expression in his eyes. All I could see was thoughtfulness. He kept everything else hidden, if there was anything else. Jacob Black can give you presents. It wasn't a question or an accusation, just a statement of fact, but I knew he was referring to my last birthday, the fit I'd thrown over gifts. I hadn't wanted any, especially not from Edward. It wasn't entirely logical, and of course everyone had ignored me anyway. You've given me presents, I reminded him. You know I like the homemade kind. He pursed his lips for a second. How about hand-me-downs? Are those acceptable? What do you mean? This bracelet. His finger traced a circle around my wrist. You'll be wearing this a lot? I shrugged. Because you wouldn't want to hurt his feelings, he suggested shrewdly. Sure, I guess so. Don't you think it's fair then? He asked, looking down at my hand as he spoke. He turned it palm up and ran his finger along the veins in my wrist. If I have a little representation. Representation? A charm. Something to keep me on your mind. You're in every thought I have. I don't need reminders. If I gave you something, would you wear it? He pressed. A hand-me-down? I checked. Yes. Something I've had for a while. He smiled his angel smile. If this was the only reaction to Jacob's gift, I would take it gladly. Whatever makes you happy. Have you noticed the inequality? He asked, and his voice turned accusing. Because I certainly have. What inequality? His eyes narrowed. Everyone else is able to get away with giving you things. Everyone but me. I would have loved to get you a graduation present, but I didn't. I knew it would have upset you more than if anyone else did. That's utterly unfair. How do you explain yourself? Easy, I shrugged. You're more important than everyone else, and you've given me you. That's already more than I deserve. Anything else you give me just throws us more out of balance. He processed that for a moment, and then rolled his eyes. The way you regard me is ludicrous. I chewed my breakfast calmly. I knew he wouldn't listen if I told him that he had that backward. Edward's phone buzzed. He looked at the number before he opened it. What is it, Alice? He listened, and I waited for his reaction, suddenly nervous. But whatever she said didn't surprise him. He sighed a few times. I sort of guessed as much, he told her, staring into my eyes, a disapproving arch to his brow. She was talking in her sleep. I flushed. What had I said now? I'll take care of it, he promised. He glared at me as he shut his phone. Is there something you'd like to talk to me about? I deliberated for a moment. Given Alice's warning last night, I could guess why she'd called. And then, remembering the troubled dreams I'd had as I'd slept through the day. Dreams where I chased after Jasper, trying to follow him and find the clearing in the maze-like woods, knowing I would find Edward there. Edward and the monsters who wanted to kill me. But not caring about them because I'd already made my decision. I could also guess what Edward had overheard while I'd slept. I pursed my lips for a moment, not quite able to meet his gaze. He waited. I like Jasper's idea, I finally said. He groaned. I want to help. I have to do something, I insisted. It wouldn't help to have you in danger. Jasper thinks it would. This is his area of expertise. Edward glowered at me. You can't keep me away, I threatened. I'm not going to hide out in the forest while you all take risks for me. Suddenly, he was fighting a smile. Alice doesn't see you in the clearing, Bella. She sees you stumbling around, lost in the woods. You won't be able to find us. You'll just make it more time-consuming for me to find you afterward. I tried to keep it as cool as he was. That's because Alice didn't factor in Seth Clearwater, I said politely. If she had, of course, she wouldn't have been able to see anything at all. But it sounds like Seth wants to be there as much as I do. It shouldn't be too hard to persuade him to show me the way. Anger flickered across his face. And then he took a deep breath and composed himself. That might have worked if you hadn't told me. Now I'll just ask Sam to give Seth certain orders. Much as he might want to, Seth won't be able to ignore that kind of injunction. I kept my smile pleasant. But why would Sam give those orders? If I tell him how it would help for me to be there, I'll bet Sam would rather do me a favor than you. He had to compose himself again. Maybe you're right. But I'm sure Jacob would be only too eager to give the exact same orders. I frowned. Jacob? Jacob is second in command. Did he ever tell you that? His orders have to be followed too. He had me, and by his smile he knew it. My forehead crumpled. Jacob would be on his side. In this one instance, I was sure. And Jacob had never told me that. Edward took advantage of the fact that I was momentarily stumped, continuing in a suspiciously smooth and soothing voice. I got a fascinating look into the pack's minds last night. It was better than a soap opera. I had no idea how complex the dynamic is with such a large pack. The pull of the individual against the plural psyche. Absolutely fascinating. He was obviously trying to distract me. I glared at him. Jacob's been keeping a lot of secrets, he said with a grin. I didn't answer. I just kept glaring, holding on to my argument and waiting for an opening. For instance, did you note the smaller grey wolf there last night? I nodded, one stiff nod. He chuckled. They take all of their legends so seriously. Turns out there are things that none of their stories prepared them for. I sighed. Okay, I'll bite. What are you talking about? They always accepted without question that it was only the direct grandsons of the original wolf who had the power to transform. So someone changed who wasn't a direct descendant? No, she's a direct descendant, all right. I blinked and my eyes widened. She? He nodded. She knows you. Her name's Leah Clearwater. Leah's a werewolf? I shrieked. What? For how long? Why didn't Jacob tell me? There are things he wasn't allowed to share. Their numbers, for instance. Like I said before, when Sam gives an order, the pack simply isn't able to ignore it. Jacob was very careful to think of other things when he was near me. Of course, after last night, that's all out the window. I can't believe it. Leah Clearwater? Suddenly I remembered Jacob speaking of Leah and Sam, the way he acted as if he'd said too much, after he'd said something about Sam having to look in Leah's eyes every day and know that he'd broken all his promises. Leah on a cliff, a tear glistening on her cheek when old Quill had spoken of the burden and sacrifice the Quileute sons shared, and Billy spending time with Sue because she was having trouble with her kids. And here the trouble actually was that both of them were werewolves now. I hadn't given much thought to Leah Clearwater, just to grieve for her loss when Harry had passed away, and then to pity her again when Jacob had told her story, about how strange imprinting between Sam and her cousin Emily had broken Leah's heart. And now, she was part of Sam's pack, hearing his thoughts, and unable to hide her own. I really hate that part, Jacob had said. Everything you're ashamed of, laid out for everyone to see. Poor Leah, I whispered. Edward snorted. She's making life exceedingly unpleasant for the rest of them. I'm not sure she deserves your sympathy. What do you mean? It's hard enough for them, having to share all their thoughts. Most of them try to cooperate, make it easier. When even one member is deliberately malicious, it's painful for everyone. She has reason enough, I mumbled, still on her side. Oh, I know, he said. The imprinting compulsion is one of the strangest things I've ever witnessed in my life, and I've seen some strange things. He shook his head wonderingly. The way Sam is tied to his Emily is impossible to describe. Or should I say her Sam? Sam really had no choice. It reminds me of a Midsummer Night's Dream, with all the chaos caused by the fairies' love spells. Like magic, he smiled. It's very nearly as strong as the way I feel about you. Poor Leah, I said again. But what do you mean, malicious? She's constantly bringing up things they'd rather not think of, he explained. For example, Embry. What's with Embry? I asked, surprised. His mother moved down from the Makar reservation 17 years ago, when she was pregnant with him. She's not Quileute. Everyone assumed she'd left his father behind with the Makars, but then he joined the pack. So the prime candidates for his father are Quill Atera Sr., Joshua Uli, or Billy Black. All of them married at that point, of course. No, I gasped. Edward was right. This was exactly like a soap opera. Now Sam, Jacob, and Quill all wonder which of them has a half-brother. They'd all like to think it's Sam, since his father was never much of a father. But the doubt is always there. Jacob's never been able to ask Billy about that. Wow, how did you get so much in one night? The pack mind is mesmerizing, all thinking together and then separately at the same time. There's so much to read. He sounded faintly regretful, like someone who'd had to put down a good book just before the climax. I laughed. The pack is fascinating, I agreed. Almost as fascinating as you are when you're trying to distract me. His expression became polite again, a perfect poker face. I have to be in that clearing, Edward. No, he said in a very final tone. A certain path occurred to me at that moment. It wasn't so much that I had to be in the clearing. I just had to be where Edward was. Cruel, I accused myself. Selfish, 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 don't do it. I ignored my better instincts. I couldn't look at him while I spoke, though. The guilt had my eyes glued to the table. Okay, look, Edward, I whispered. Here's the thing. I've already gone crazy once. I know what my limits are. And I can't stand it if you leave me again. I didn't look up to see his reaction, afraid to know how much pain I was inflicting. I did hear his sudden intake of breath and the silence that followed. I stared at the dark wooden tabletop, wishing that I could take the words back, but knowing I probably wouldn't, not if it worked. Suddenly, his arms were around me, his hand stroking my face, my arms. He was comforting me. The guilt went into spiral mode, but the survival instinct was stronger. There was no question that he was fundamental to my survival. You know it's not like that, Bella. I won't be far, and it will be over quickly. I can't stand it, I insisted, still staring down. Not knowing whether or not you'll come back? How do I live through that, no matter how quickly it's over? He sighed. It's going to be easy, Bella. There's no reason for your fears. None at all? None. And everybody'll be fine? Everyone, he promised. So there's no way at all that I need to be in the clearing? Of course not. Alice just told me that they're down to 19. We'll be able to handle it easily. That's right. You said it was so easy that someone could sit out. I repeated his words from last night. Did you really mean that? Yes. It felt too simple. He had to see it coming. So easy that you could sit out? After a long moment of silence, I finally looked up at his expression. The poker face was back. I took a deep breath. So it's one way or the other. Either there's more danger than you want me to know about, in which case it would be right for me to be there to do what I can to help, or it's going to be so easy that they'll get by without you. Which way is it? He didn't speak. I knew what he was thinking of. The same thing I was thinking of. Carlisle, Esme, Emmett, Rosalie, Jasper, and I forced myself to think the last name. And Alice. I wondered if I was a monster. Not the kind that he thought he was, but the real kind. The kind that hurt people. The kind that had no limits when it came to what they wanted. What I wanted was to keep him safe. Safe with me. Did I have a limit to what I would do? What I would sacrifice for that? I wasn't sure. You ask me to let them fight without my help, he said in a quiet voice. Yes. I was surprised I could keep my voice even. I felt so wretched inside. Or to let me be there. Either way, so long as we're together. He took a deep breath and then exhaled slowly. He moved his hands to place them on either side of my face, forcing me to meet his gaze. He looked into my eyes for a long time. I wondered what he was looking for, and what it was that he found. Was the guilt as thick on my face as it was in my stomach, sickening me? His eyes tightened against some emotion that I couldn't read, and he dropped one hand to pull out his phone again. Alice, he sighed. Could you come babysit Bella for a bit? He raised one eyebrow, daring me to object to the word. I need to speak with Jasper. She evidently agreed. He put the phone away and went back to staring at my face. What are you going to say to Jasper? I whispered. I'm going to discuss me sitting out. It was easy to read in his face how difficult the words were for him. I'm sorry. I was sorry. I hated to make him do this. Not enough that I could fake a smile and tell him to go on ahead without me. Definitely not that much. Don't apologize, he said, smiling just a little. Never be afraid to tell me how you feel, Bella. If this is what you need. He shrugged. You are my first priority. I didn't mean it that way, like you have to choose me over your family. I know that. Besides, that's not what you asked. You gave me two alternatives that you could live with, and I chose the one that I could live with. That's how compromise is supposed to work. I leaned forward and rested my forehead against his chest. Thank you, I whispered. Anytime, he answered, kissing my hair. Anything, We didn't move for a long moment. I kept my face hidden, pressed against his shirt. Two voices struggled inside me, one that wanted to be good and brave, and one that told the good one to keep her mouth shut. "Who's the third wife?" he asked me suddenly. "Huh?" I said, stalling. I didn't remember having had that dream again. "You were mumbling something about the third wife last night. The rest made a little sense, but you lost me there." "Oh, yeah, that was just one of the stories that I heard at the bonfire the other night." I shrugged. "I guess it stuck with me." Edward leaned away from me and cocked his head to the side, probably confused by the uncomfortable edge to my voice. Before he could ask, Alice appeared in the kitchen doorway with a sour expression. "You're going to miss all the fun," she grumbled. "Hello, Alice," he greeted her. He put one finger under my chin and tilted my face up to kiss me goodbye. "I'll be back later tonight," he promised me. "I'll go work this out with the others, rearrange things." "Okay." "There's not much to arrange," Alice said. "I already told them. Emmett's pleased." Edward sighed. "Of course he is." He walked out the door, leaving me to face Alice. She glared at me. "I'm sorry," I apologized again. "Do you think this will make it more dangerous for you?" She snorted. "You worry too much, Bella. You're going to go prematurely grey." "Why are you upset then?" "Edward's such a grouch when he doesn't get his way. I'm just anticipating living with him for the next few months." She made a face. "I suppose if it keeps you sane, it's worth it. But I wish you could control the pessimism, Bella. It's so unnecessary." "Would you let Jasper go without you?" I demanded. Alice grimaced. "That's different." "Sure it is." "Go clean yourself up," she ordered me. "Charlie'll be home in 15 minutes. And if you look this ragged, he's not going to want to let you out again." Wow, I'd really lost the whole day. It felt like such a waste. I was glad I wouldn't always have to squander my time with sleeping. I was entirely presentable when Charlie got home, fully dressed, hair decent, and in the kitchen putting his dinner on the table. Alice sat in Edward's usual place, and this seemed to make Charlie's day. "Howdy, Alice. How are you, hun?" "I'm fine, Charlie, thanks." "I see you finally made it out of bed, sleepyhead," he said to me as I sat beside him before turning back to Alice. "Everyone's talking about that party your parents threw last night. I'll bet you got one heck of a cleanup job ahead of you." Alice shrugged, knowing her it was already done. "It was worth it," she said. "It was a great party." "Where's Edward?" Charlie asked, a little grudgingly. "Is he helping clean up?" Alice sighed and her face turned tragic. It was probably an act, but it was too perfect for me to be positive. "No, he's off planning the weekend with Emmett and Carlisle." "Hiking again?" Alice nodded, her face suddenly forlorn. "Yes, they're all going except me. We always go backpacking at the end of the school year, sort of a celebration, but this year I decided I'd rather shop than hike, and not one of them will stay behind with me. I'm abandoned." Her face puckered, the expression so devastated that Charlie leaned toward her automatically, one hand reaching out looking for some way to help. I glared at her suspiciously. What was she doing? "Alice, honey, why don't you come stay with us?" Charlie offered. "I hate to think of you all alone in that big house." She sighed. Something squashed my foot under the table. "Ow!" I protested. Charlie turned to me. "What?" Alice shot me a frustrated look. I could tell she thought that I was very slow tonight. Stub my toe, I muttered. Oh. He looked back to Alice. So how about it? She stepped on my foot again, not quite so hard this time. Dad, we don't really have the best accommodations here. I bet Alice doesn't want to sleep on my floor. Charlie pursed his lips. Alice pulled out the devastated expression again. Maybe Bella should stay up there with you, he suggested. Just until your folks get back. Oh, would you, Bella? Alice smiled at me radiantly. You don't mind shopping with me, right? Sure, I agreed. Shopping? Okay. When are they leaving? Charlie asked. Alice made another face. Tomorrow. When do you want me? I asked. After dinner, I guess, she said, and then put one finger to her chin, thoughtful. You don't have anything going on Saturday, do you? I want to get out of town to shop, and it'll be an all-day thing. Not Seattle, Charlie interjected, his eyebrows pulling together. Of course not, Alice agreed at once, though we both knew Seattle would be plenty safe on Saturday. I was thinking Olympia, maybe. You'll like that, Bella. Charlie was cheerful with relief. Go get your fill of the sea. Yeah, Dad, it'll be great. With one easy conversation, Alice had cleared my schedule for the battle. Edward returned not much later. He accepted Charlie's wishes for a nice trip without surprise. He claimed they were leaving early in the morning and said goodnight before the usual time. Alice left with him. I excused myself soon after they left. You can't be tired, Charlie protested. A little, I lied. No wonder you like to skip the parties, he muttered. Takes you so long to recover. Upstairs, Edward was lying across my bed. What time are we meeting with the wolves? I murmured as I went to join him. In an hour. That's good. Jake and his friends need to get some sleep. They don't need as much as you do, he pointed out. I moved to another topic, assuming he was about to try to talk me into staying home. Did Alice tell you that she's kidnapping me again? He grinned. Actually, she's not. I stared at him, confused, and he laughed quietly at my expression. I'm the only one who has permission to hold you hostage, remember, he said. Alice is going hunting with the rest of them. He sighed. I guess I don't need to do that now. You're kidnapping me? He nodded. I thought about that briefly. No Charlie listening downstairs, checking on me every so often. No house full of wide-awake vampires with their intrusively sensitive hearing. Just him and me, really alone. Is that all right? He asked, concerned by my silence. Well, sure, except for one thing. What thing? His eyes were anxious. It was mind-boggling, but somehow he still seemed unsure of his hold on me. Maybe I needed to make myself more clear. Why didn't Alice tell Charlie you were leaving tonight? I asked. He laughed, relieved. I enjoyed the trip to the clearing more than I had last night. I still felt guilty, still afraid, but I wasn't terrified anymore. I could function. I could see past what was coming, and almost believe that maybe it would be okay. Edward was apparently fine with the idea of missing the fight, and that made it very hard not to believe him when he said this would be easy. He wouldn't leave his family if he didn't believe it himself. Maybe Alice was right. and I did worry too much. We got to the clearing last. Jasper and Emma were already wrestling, just warming up from the sounds of their laughter. Alice and Rosalie lounged on the hard ground watching. Esme and Carlyle were talking a few yards away, heads close together, fingers linked, not paying attention. It was much brighter tonight, the moon shining through the thin clouds, and I could easily see the 3 wolves that sat around the edge of the practice ring, spaced far apart to watch from different angles. It was also easy to recognize Jacob. I would have known him at once, even if he hadn't looked up and stared at the sound of our approach. Where are the rest of the wolves, I wondered. They don't all need to be here. One would do the job, but Sam didn't trust us enough to just send Jacob, though Jacob was willing. Quill and Embry are his usual, I guess you could call them, his wingmen. Jacob trusts you. Edward nodded. He trusts us not to try to kill him. That's about it, though. Are you participating tonight? I asked, hesitant. I knew this was going to be almost as hard for him as being left behind would have been for me. Maybe harder. I'll help Jasper when he needs it. He wants to try some unequal groupings, teach them how to deal with multiple attackers. He shrugged. A fresh wave of panic shattered my brief sense of confidence. They were still outnumbered. I was making that worse. I stared at the field, trying to hide my reaction. It was the wrong place to look, struggling as I was to lie to myself, to convince myself that everything would work out as I needed it to. Because when I forced my eyes away from the Cullens, away from the image of their play fighting that would be real and deadly in just a few days, Jacob caught my eye and smiled. It was the same wolfy grin as before, his eyes scrunching the way that they did when he was human. It was hard to believe that not so long ago I had found the werewolves frightening, lost sleep to nightmares about them. I knew without asking which of the others was Embry and which was Quill, because Embry was clearly the thinner grey wolf with the dark spots on his back, sat so patiently watching, while Quill, deep chocolate brown, lighter over his face, twitched constantly, looking like he was dying to join in the mock fight. They weren't monsters, even like this. They were friends. Friends who didn't look nearly as indestructible as Emmett and Jasper did, moving faster than cobra strikes while the moonlight glinted off their granite-hard skin. Friends who didn't seem to understand the danger involved here. Friends who were still somewhat mortal. Friends who could bleed. Friends who could die. Edward's confidence was reassuring, because it was plain that he wasn't truly worried about his family. But would it hurt him if something happened to the wolves? Was there any reason for him to be anxious if that possibility didn't bother him? Edward's confidence only applied to one set of fears. I tried to smile back at Jacob, swallowing against the lump in my throat. I didn't seem to get it right. Jacob sprang lightly to his feet, his agility at odds with his sheer mass, and trotted over to where Edward and I stood on the fringe of things. Jacob? Edward greeted him politely. Jacob ignored him, his dark eyes on me. He put his head down to my level as he had yesterday, cocking it to one side. A low whimper escaped his muzzle. I'm fine, I answered, not needing the translation that Edward was about to give. Just worried, you know? Jacob continued to stare at me. He wants to know why, Edward murmured. Jacob growled, not a threatening sound, an annoyed sound, and Edward's lips twitched. What? I asked, He thinks my translations leave something to be desired. What he actually thought was, "That's really stupid. What is there to be worried about?" I edited because I thought it was rude. I halfway smiled, too anxious to really feel amused. "There's plenty to be worried about," I told Jacob, "like a bunch of really stupid wolves getting themselves hurt." Jacob laughed his coughing bark. Edward sighed. "Jasper wants help. You'll be okay without a translator. I'll manage." Edward looked at me wistfully for 1 minute, his expression hard to understand, then turned his back and strode over to where Jasper waited. I sat down where I was. The ground was cold and uncomfortable. Jacob took a step forward, then looked back at me, and a low whine rose in his throat. He took another half step. "Go on without me," I told him. "I don't want to watch." Jacob leaned his head to the side again for a moment, and then folded himself onto the ground beside me with a rumbling sigh. "Really, you can go ahead," I assured him. He didn't respond. He just put his head down on his paws. I stared up at the bright silver clouds, not wanting to see the fight. My imagination had more than enough fuel. A breeze blew through the clearing, and I shivered. Jacob scooted himself closer to me, pressing his warm fur against my left side. Thanks," I muttered. After a few minutes, I leaned against his wide shoulder. It was much more comfortable that way. The clouds moved slowly across the sky, dimming and brightening as thick patches crossed the moon and passed on. Absently, I began pulling my fingers through the fur on his neck. That same strange humming sound that he'd made yesterday rumbled in his throat. It was a homey kind of sound. Rougher, wilder than a cat's purr, but conveying the same sense of contentment. "You know, I never had a dog," I mused. "I always wanted one, but Renee's allergic." Jacob laughed. His body shook under me. "Aren't you worried about Saturday at all?" I asked. He turned his enormous head toward me so that I could see one of his eyes roll. "I wish I could feel that positive." He leaned his head against my leg and started humming again, and it did make me feel just a little bit better. "So we've got some hiking to do tomorrow, I guess," he rumbled. The sound was enthusiastic. "It might be a long hike," I warned him. "Edward doesn't judge distances the way a normal person does." Jacob barked another laugh. I settled deeper into his warm fur, resting my head against his neck. It was strange. Even though he was in this bizarre form, this felt more like the way Jake and I used to be. The easy, effortless friendship that was as natural as breathing in and out than the last few times I'd been with Jacob while he was human. Odd that I should find that again here, when I'd thought this wolf thing was the cause of its loss. The killing games continued in the clearing, and I stared at the hazy moon. Everything was ready. I was packed for my 2-day visit with Alice, and my bag waited for me on the passenger seat of my truck. I'd given the concert tickets to Angela, Ben, and Mike. Mike was going to take Jessica, which was exactly as I'd hoped. Billy had borrowed old Quill Latera's boat and invited Charlie down for some open sea fishing before the afternoon game. Colin and Brady, the 2 youngest werewolves, were staying behind to protect La Push, though they were just children, both of them only 13. Still, Charlie would be safer than anyone left in Forks. I had done all that I could do. I tried to accept that, and put the things that were outside of my control out of my head, for tonight at least. One way or another, this would all be over in 48 hours. The thought was almost comforting. Edward had requested that I relax, and I was going to do my best. For this one night, could we try to forget everything besides just you and me? He'd pleaded, unleashing the full force of his eyes on me. It seems like I can never get enough time like that. I need to be with you. Just you. That was not a hard request to agree to, though I knew that forgetting my fears would be much easier said than done. Other matters were on my mind now, knowing that we had this night to be alone, and that would help. There were some things that had changed. For instance, I was ready. I was ready to join his family and his world. The fear and guilt and anguish I was feeling now had taught me that much. I'd had a chance to concentrate on this, as I had gazed at the moon through the clouds and rested against a werewolf. And I knew I would not panic again. The next time something came at us, I would be ready. An asset, not a liability. He would never have to make the choice between me and his family again. We would be partners, like Alice and Jasper. Next time, I would do my part. I would wait for the sword to be removed from over my head, so that Edward would be satisfied. But it wasn't necessary. I was ready. There was only one missing piece. One piece because there were some things that had not changed, and that included the desperate way I loved him. I'd had plenty of time to think through the ramifications of Jasper and Emmett's bet, to figure out the things I was willing to lose with my humanity, and the part that I was not willing to give up. I knew which human experience I was going to insist on before I became inhuman. So we had some things to work out tonight. After everything I'd seen in the past 2 years, I didn't believe in the word impossible anymore. It was going to take more than that to stop me now. Okay, well, honestly, it was probably going to be much more complicated than that. But I was going to try. As decided as I wasn't surprised that I still felt nervous as I drove down the long path to his house. I didn't know how to do what I was trying to do, and that guaranteed me some serious jitters. He sat in the passenger seat, fighting a smile at my slow pace. I was surprised that he hadn't insisted on taking the wheel, but tonight he seemed content to go at my speed. It was after dark when we reached the house. In spite of that, the meadow was bright in the light shining from every window. As soon as I cut the engine, he was at my door, opening it for me. He lifted me from the cab with one arm, slinging my bag out of the truck bed and over his shoulder with the other. His lips found mine as I heard him kick the truck door shut behind me. Without breaking the kiss, he swung me up so that I was cradled in his arms and carried me into the house. Was the front door already open? I didn't know. We were inside though, and I was dizzy. I had to remind myself to breathe. The kissing did not frighten me. It wasn't like before when I could feel the fear and panic leaking through his control. His lips were not anxious, but enthusiastic now. He seemed as thrilled as I was that we had tonight to concentrate on being together. He continued to kiss me for several minutes, standing there in the entry. He seemed less guarded than usual, his mouth cold and urgent on mine. I began to feel cautiously optimistic. Perhaps getting what I wanted would not be as difficult as I'd expected it to be. No, of course it was going to be just exactly that difficult. With a low chuckle, he pulled me away, holding me at arm's length. "Welcome home," he said, his eyes liquid and warm. "That sounds nice," I said, breathless. He set me gently on my feet. I wrapped both my arms around him, refusing to allow any space between us. "I have something for you," he said, his tone conversational. "Oh? Your hand-me-down. Remember, you said that was allowable." "Oh, that's right. I guess I did say that." He chuckled at my reluctance. "It's up in my room. Shall I go get it?" "His bedroom?" "Sure," I agreed, feeling quite devious as I wound my fingers through his. "Let's go." He must have been eager to give me my non-present because human velocity was not fast enough for him. He scooped me up again and nearly flew up the stairs to his room. He set me down at the door and darted into his closet. He was back before I'd taken a step, but I ignored him and went to the huge gold bed, plopping down on the edge and sliding to the center. I curled up in a ball, my arms wrapped around my knees. "Okay," I grumbled. Now that I was where I wanted to be, I could afford a little reluctance. "Let me have it." Edward laughed. He climbed onto the bed to sit next to me, and my heart thumped unevenly. Hopefully he would write that off as some reaction to him giving me presents. "A hand-me-down," he reminded me sternly. He pulled my left wrist away from my leg and touched the silver bracelet for just a moment. Then he gave me my arm back. I examined it cautiously. On the opposite side of the chain from the wolf, there now hung a brilliant heart-shaped crystal. It was cut in a million facets, so that even in the subdued light shining from the lamp, it sparkled. I inhaled in a low gasp. It was my mother's. He shrugged deprecatingly. I inherited quite a few baubles like this. I've given some to Esme and Alice both, so clearly this is not a big deal in any way. I smiled ruefully at his assurance. "But I thought it was a good representation," he continued. "It's hard and cold," he laughed, "and it throws rainbows in the sunlight." "You forgot the most important similarity," I murmured. "It's beautiful." "My heart is just as silent," he mused. "And it, too, is yours." I twisted my wrist so the heart would glimmer. "Thank you for both." "No, thank you. It's a relief to have you accept a gift so easily. Good practice for you too." He grinned, flashing his teeth. I leaned into him, ducking my head under his arm and cuddling into his side. It probably felt similar to snuggling with Michelangelo's David, except that this perfect marble creature wrapped his arms around me to pull me closer. It seemed like a good place to start. Can we discuss something? I'd appreciate it if you could begin by being open-minded. He hesitated for a moment. I'll give it my best effort, he agreed, cautious now. I'm not breaking any rules here, I promised. This is strictly about you and me. I cleared my throat. So, I was impressed by how well we were able to compromise the other night. I was thinking I'd like to apply the same principle to a different situation. I wondered why I was being so formal. Must be the nerves. What would you like to negotiate? He asked, a smile in his voice. I struggled, trying to find exactly the right words to open with. Listen to your heart fly, he murmured. It's fluttering like a hummingbird's wings. Are you all right? I'm great. Please go on then, he encouraged. Well, I guess first I wanted to talk to you about that whole ridiculous marriage condition thing. It's only ridiculous to you. What about it? I was wondering, is that open to negotiation? Edward frowned, serious now. I've already made the largest concession by far and away. I've agreed to take your life away against my better judgment. That ought to entitle me to a few compromises on your part. No, I shook my head, focusing on keeping my face composed. That part's a done deal. We're not discussing my renovations right now. I want to hammer out some other details. He looked at me suspiciously. Which details do you mean exactly? I hesitated. Let's clarify your prerequisites first. You know what I want. Matrimony? I made it sound like a dirty word. Yes. He smiled a wide smile. To start with. The shock spoiled my carefully composed expression. There's more? Well, he said, and his face was calculating. If you're my wife, then what's mine is yours. Like tuition money, so there would be no problem with Dartmouth. Anything else while you're already being absurd? I wouldn't mind some time. No time. That's a deal breaker right there. He sighed longingly. Just a year or two. I shook my head, my lips set in a stubborn frown. Move along to the next one. That's it, unless you'd like to talk cars. He grinned widely when I grimaced, then took my hand and began playing with my fingers. I didn't realize there was anything else you wanted besides being transformed into a monster yourself. I'm extremely curious. His voice was low and soft. The slight edge would have been hard to detect if I hadn't known it so well. I paused, staring at his hand on mine. I still didn't know how to begin. I felt his eyes watching me, and I was afraid to look up. The blood began to burn in my face. His cool fingers brushed my cheek. You're blushing, he asked in surprise. I kept my eyes down. Please, Bella. The suspense is painful. I bit my lip. Bella. His tone reproached me now, reminded me that it was hard for him when I kept my thoughts to myself. Well, I'm a little worried about after, I admitted, finally looking at him. I felt his body tense, but his voice was gentle and velvet. What has you worried? all of you just seem so convinced that the only thing I'm going to be interested in afterward is slaughtering everyone in town, I confessed, while he winced at my choice of words. And I'm afraid I'll be so preoccupied with the mayhem that I won't be me anymore, and that I won't want you the same way I do now. Bella, that part doesn't last forever, he assured me. He was missing the point. Edward, I said, nervous, staring at a freckle on my wrist. There's something that I want to do before I'm not human anymore. He waited for me to continue. I didn't. My face was all hot. Whatever you want, he encouraged, anxious and completely clueless. Do you promise? I muttered, knowing my attempt to trap him with his words was not going to work, but unable to resist. Yes, he said. I looked up to see that his eyes were earnest and confused. Tell me what you want, and you can have it. I couldn't believe how awkward and idiotic I felt. I was too innocent, which was of course central to the discussion. I didn't have the faintest idea how to be seductive. I would just have to settle for flushed and self-conscious. You? I mumbled almost incoherently. I'm yours, he smiled, still oblivious, trying to hold my gaze as I looked away again. I took a deep breath and shifted forward so that I was kneeling on the bed. Then I wrapped my arms around his neck and kissed him. He kissed me back, bewildered but willing. His lips were gentle against mine, and I could tell his mind was elsewhere, trying to figure out what was on my mind. I decided he needed a hint. My hands were slightly shaky as I unlocked my arms from around his neck. My fingers slid down his neck to the collar of his shirt. The trembling didn't help as I tried to hurry to undo the buttons before he stopped me. His lips froze, and I could almost hear the click in his head as he put together my words and my actions. He pushed me away at once, his face heavily disapproving. Be reasonable, Bella. You promised whatever I wanted, I reminded him without hope. We're not having this discussion. He glared at me while he refastened the 2 buttons I'd managed to open. My teeth clamped together. I say we are, I growled. I moved my hands to my blouse and yanked open the top button. He grabbed my wrists and pinned them to my sides. I say we're not, he said flatly. We glowered at each other. You wanted to know, I pointed out. I thought it would be something faintly realistic. So you can ask for any stupid, ridiculous thing you want, like getting married, but I'm not even allowed to even discuss what While I was ranting, he pulled my hands together to restrain them in just one of his, and put his other hand over my mouth. No. His face was hard. I took a deep breath to steady myself, and as the anger began to fade, I felt something else. It took me a minute to recognize why I was staring down again, the blush returning, why my stomach felt uneasy, why there was too much moisture in my eyes, why I suddenly wanted to run from the room. Rejection washed through me, instinctive and strong. I knew it was irrational. He'd been very clear on other occasions that my safety was the only factor. Yet I'd never made myself quite so vulnerable before. I scowled at the golden comforter that matched his eyes and tried to banish the reflex reaction that told me I was unwanted and unwantable. Edward sighed. The hand over my mouth moved under my chin, and he pulled my face up until I had to look at him. What now? Nothing, I mumbled. He scrutinized my face for a long moment while I tried unsuccessfully to twist away from his gaze. His brow furrowed, and his expression became horrified. Did I hurt your feelings? He asked, shocked. No, I lied. So quickly that I wasn't even sure how it happened, I was in his arms, my face cradled between his shoulder and his hand, while his thumb stroked reassuringly against my cheek. You know why I have to say no, he murmured. You know that I want you to. Do you? I whispered, my voice full of doubt. Of course I do. You silly, beautiful, oversensitive girl. He laughed once, and then his voice was bleak. Doesn't everyone? I feel like there's a line behind me, jockeying for position, waiting for me to make a big enough mistake. You're too desirable for your own good. Who's being silly now? I doubted if awkward, self-conscious, and inept added up to desirable in anyone's book. Do I have to send a petition around to get you to believe? Shall I tell you whose names would be on top of the list? You know a few of them, but some might surprise you. I shook my head against his chest, grimacing. You're just trying to distract me. Let's get back to the subject. He sighed. Tell me if I have anything wrong. I tried to sound detached. Your demands are marriage? I couldn't say the word without making a face. Paying my tuition, more time, and you wouldn't mind if my vehicle went a little faster. I raised my eyebrows. Did I get everything? It's a hefty list. Only the first is a demand. He seemed to be having a hard time keeping a straight face. The others are merely requests. And my lone, solitary little demand is... Demand, he interrupted, suddenly serious again. Yes, demand. His eyes narrowed. Getting married is a stretch for me. I'm not giving in unless I get something in return. He leaned down to whisper in my ear. No, he murmured silkily. It's not possible now. Later, when you're less breakable. Be patient, Bella. I tried to keep my voice firm and reasonable. But that's the problem. It won't be the same when I'm less breakable. I won't be the same. I don't know who I'll be then. You'll still be Bella, he promised. I frowned. If I'm so far gone that I'd want to kill Charlie, that I'd drink Jacob's blood or Angela's if I got the chance, how can that be true? It will pass, and I doubt you'll want to drink the dog's blood. He pretended to shudder at the thought. Even as a newborn, you'll have better taste than that. I ignored his attempt to sidetrack me. But that will always be what I want most, won't it? Blood, blood, and more blood. The fact that you're still alive is proof that that is not true, he pointed out. Over 80 years later, I reminded him. What I meant was physically, though. Intellectually, I know I'll be able to be myself after a while. But just purely physically, I'll always be thirsty more than anything else. He didn't answer. So I will be different, I concluded unopposed. Because right now, physically, there's nothing I want more than you. More than food or water or oxygen. Intellectually, I have my priorities in a slightly more sensible order, but physically, I twisted my head to kiss the palm of his hand. He took a deep breath. I was surprised that it sounded a little unsteady. "Bella, I could kill you," he whispered. "I don't think you could." Edward's eyes tightened. He lifted his hand from my face and reached quickly behind himself for something I couldn't see. There was a muffled, snapping sound, and the bed quivered beneath us. Something dark was in his hand. He held it up for my curious examination. It was a metal flower, one of the roses that adorned the wrought iron posts and canopy of his bed frame. His hand closed for a brief second, his fingers contracting gently, and then it opened again. Without a word, he offered me the crushed, uneven lump of black metal. It was a cast of the inside of his hand, like a piece of Play-Doh squeezed in a child's fist. A half-second passed, and the shape crumpled into black sand in his palm. I glared. "That's not what I meant. I already know how strong you are. You didn't have to break the furniture." "What did you mean then?" he asked in a dark voice, tossing the handful of iron sand to the corner of the room. It hit the wall with a sound like rain. His eyes were intent on my face as I struggled to explain. "Obviously not that you aren't physically able to hurt me if you wanted to. More that you don't want to hurt me. So much so that I don't think you ever could." He started shaking his head before I was done. "It might not work like that, Bella." "Might?" I scoffed. "You have no more idea what you're talking about than I do." "Exactly. Do you imagine I would ever take that kind of risk with you?" I stared into his eyes for a long minute. There was no sign of compromise, no hint of indecision in them. "Please," I finally whispered, hopeless. "It's all I want. Please." I closed my eyes in defeat, waiting for the quick and final no. But he didn't answer immediately. I hesitated in disbelief, stunned to hear that his breathing was uneven again. I opened my eyes and his face was torn. "Please?" I whispered again, my heartbeat picking up speed. My words tumbled out as I rushed to take advantage of the sudden uncertainty in his eyes. "You don't have to make me any guarantees. If it doesn't work out right, well, then that's that. Just let us try. Only try. And I'll give you what you want," I promised rashly. "I'll marry you. I'll let you pay for Dartmouth. And I won't complain about the bribe to get me in. You can even buy me a fast car if it makes you happy. Just, please." His icy arms tightened around me. His lips were at my ear. His cool breath made me shiver. "This is unbearable. So many things I've wanted to give you. And this is what you decide to demand. Do you have any idea how painful it is? Trying to refuse you when you plead with me this way?" "Then don't refuse," I suggested breathlessly. He didn't respond. "Please," I tried again. "Bella." He shook his head slowly, but it didn't feel like a denial as his face, his lips moved back and forth across my throat. It felt more like surrender. My heart, racing already, spluttered frantically. Again, I took what advantage I could, when his face turned toward mine with the slow movement of his indecision. I twisted quickly in his arms till my lips reached his. His hands seized my face, and I thought he was going to push me away again. I was wrong. His mouth was not gentle. There was a brand new edge of conflict and desperation in the way his lips moved. I locked my arms around his neck, and to my suddenly overheated skin, his body felt colder than ever. I trembled, but it was not from the chill. He didn't stop kissing me. I was the one who had to break away, gasping for air. Then his lips did not leave my skin. They just moved to my throat. The thrill of victory was a strange high. It made me feel powerful, brave. My hands weren't unsteady now. I got through with the buttons on his shirt this time easily, and my fingers traced the perfect planes of his icy chest. He was too beautiful. What was the word he'd used just now? Unbearable. That was it. His beauty was too much to bear. I pulled his mouth back to mine, and he seemed just as eager as I was. One of his hands still cupped my face. His other arm was tight around my waist, straining me closer to him. It made it slightly more difficult as I tried to reach the front of my shirt, but not impossible. Cold iron fetters locked around my wrists, and I pulled my hands above my head, which was suddenly on a pillow. His lips were at my ear again. "Bella," he murmured, his voice warm and velvet. "Would you please stop trying to take your clothes off?" "Do you want to do that part?" I asked, confused. "Not tonight," he answered softly. His lips were slower now against my cheek and jaw, all the urgency gone. "Edward, don't..." I started to argue. "I'm not saying no," he reassured me. "I'm just saying not tonight." I thought about that while my breathing slowed. "Give me one good reason why tonight's not as good as any other night." I was still breathless. It made the frustration in my voice less impressive. "I wasn't born yesterday," he chuckled in my ear. "Out of the two of us, which do you think is more unwilling to give the other what they want? You just promised to marry me before you do any changing. But if I give in tonight, what guarantee do I have that you won't go running off to Carlisle in the morning? I am, clearly, much less reluctant to give you what you want. Therefore, you first." I exhaled with a loud huff. "I have to marry you first?" I asked in disbelief. "That's the deal. Take it or leave it. Compromise. Remember?" His arms wrapped around me, and he began kissing me in a way that should be illegal. Too persuasive. It was a duress, coercion. I tried to keep a clear head, and failed, quickly and absolutely. "I think that's a really bad idea," I gasped when he let me breathe. "I'm not surprised you feel that way," he smirked. "You have a one-track mind." "How did this happen?" I grumbled. "I thought I was holding my own tonight, for once, and now all of a sudden..." "You're engaged," he finished. "Ew, please don't say that out loud." "Are you going back on your word?" he demanded. He pulled away to read my face. His expression was entertained. He was having fun. I glared at him, trying to ignore the way his smile made my heart react. "Are you?" he pressed. I groaned. "No, I'm not. You happy now?" His smile was blinding. "Exceptionally." I groaned again. "Aren't you happy at all?" He kissed me again before I could answer. Another too persuasive kiss. "A little bit," I admitted when I could speak. "But not about getting married." He kissed me another time. Do you get the feeling that everything's backward? He laughed in my ear. Traditionally, shouldn't you be arguing my side and not yours? There isn't that much traditional about you and me. True. He kissed me again and kept going until my heart was racing and my skin was flushed. Look, Edward, I murmured, my voice wheedling, when he paused to kiss the palm of my hand. I said I would marry you, and I will. I promise. I swear. If you want, I'll sign a contract in my own blood. Not funny, he murmured against the inside of my wrist. What I'm saying is, I'm not going to trick you or anything. You know me better than that. So there's really no reason to wait? We're completely alone. How often does that happen? And you've provided this very large and comfortable bed. Not tonight, he said again. Don't you trust me? Of course I do. Using the hand that he was still kissing, I pulled his face back up to where I could see his expression. Then what's the problem? It's not like you didn't know you were going to win in the end. I frowned and muttered. You always win. Just hedging my bets, he said calmly. There's something else, I guessed, my eyes narrowing. There was a defensiveness about his face, a faint hint of some secret motive he was trying to hide behind his casual manner. Are you planning to go back on your word? No, he promised solemnly. I swear to you, we will try. After you marry me. I shook my head and laughed glumly. You make me feel like a villain in a melodrama, twirling my moustache while I try and steal some poor girl's virtue. His eyes were wary as they flashed across my face. Then he quickly ducked down to press his lips against my collarbone. That's it, isn't it? The short laugh that escaped me was more shocked than amused. You're trying to protect your virtue. I covered my mouth with my hand to muffle the giggle that followed. The words were so old-fashioned. No, silly girl, he muttered against my shoulder. I'm trying to protect yours, and you're making it shockingly difficult. Of all the ridiculous... Let me ask you something, he interrupted quickly. We've had this discussion before, but humor me. How many people in this room have a soul, a shot at heaven or whatever there is after this life? 2, I answered immediately, my voice fierce. All right, maybe that's true. Now, there's a world full of dissension about this, but the vast majority seem to think that there are some rules that have to be followed. Vampire rules aren't enough for you? You want to worry about human ones too? Couldn't hurt, just in case. I glared at him through narrowed eyes. Now, of course, it might be too late for me, even if you are right about my soul. No, it isn't, I argued angrily. Thou shalt not kill is commonly accepted by most major belief systems. And I've killed a lot of people, Bella. Only the bad ones. He shrugged. Maybe that counts. Maybe it doesn't. But you haven't killed anyone. That you know about, I muttered. He smiled, but otherwise ignored the interruption. And I'm going to do my best to keep you out of temptation's way. Okay, but we weren't fighting over committing murder, I reminded him. The same principle applies. The only difference is that this is the one area in which I'm just as spotless as you are. Can't I leave one rule unbroken? One? You know that I've stolen. I've lied. I've coveted. My virtue's all I have left. He grinned crookedly. I lie all the time. Yes, but you're such a bad liar that it doesn't really count. Nobody believes you. I really hope you're wrong about that, otherwise Charlie's gonna burst through the door with a loaded gun. Charlie is happier when he pretends to swallow your stories. He'd rather lie to himself than look too closely. He grinned at me. But what did you ever covet? I asked doubtfully. You have everything. I coveted you. His smile darkened. I had no right to want you. But I reached out and took you anyway. And now look what's become of you. Trying to seduce a vampire. He shook his head in mock horror. You can't covet what's already yours, I informed him. Besides, I thought it was my virtue you were worried about. It is. If it's too late for me, well, I'll be damned, no pun intended, if I'll let them keep you out too. You can't make me go somewhere you won't be, I vowed. That's my definition of hell. Anyway, I have an easy solution to all this. Let's never die, alright? Sounds simple enough. Why didn't I think of that? He smiled at me until I gave up with an angry humph. So that's it? You won't sleep with me until we're married? Technically, I can't ever sleep with you. I rolled my eyes. Very mature, Edward. But other than that detail, yes, you've got it right. I think you have an ulterior motive. His eyes widened innocently. Another one. You know this'll speed things up, I accused. He tried not to smile. There is only one thing I want to speed up. The rest can wait forever. But for that, it's true. Your impatient human hormones are my most powerful ally at this point. I can't believe I'm going along with this. When I think of Charlie and Renee, can you imagine what Angela will think? Or Jessica? Oh, I can hear the gossip now. He raised one eyebrow at me, and I knew why. What did it matter what they said about me when I would be leaving soon and not coming back? Was I really so oversensitive that I couldn't bear a few weeks of sidelong glances and leading questions? Maybe it wouldn't bug me so much if I didn't know that I would probably be gossiping just as condescendingly as the rest of them, if it was someone else getting married this summer. Married this summer? I shuddered. And then, maybe it wouldn't bug me so much if I hadn't been raised to shudder at the thought of marriage. Edward interrupted my fretting. Doesn't have to be a big production. I don't need any fanfare. You won't have to tell anyone or make any changes. We'll go to Vegas. You can wear old jeans. We'll go to the chapel with the drive-through window. I just want it to be official. That you belong to me and no one else. It couldn't be any more official than it already is, I grumbled. But his description didn't sound that bad. Only Alice would be disappointed. We'll see about that, he smiled complacently. I suppose you don't want your ring now. I had to swallow before I could speak. You suppose correctly. He laughed at my expression. That's fine. I'll get it on your finger soon enough. I glared at him. You talk like you already have one. I do, he said, unashamed, ready to force upon you at the first sign of weakness. You're unbelievable. Do you want to see it? He asked. His liquid topaz eyes were suddenly shining with excitement. No, I almost shouted, a reflex reaction. I regretted it at once. His face fell ever so slightly. Unless you really want to show it to me? I amended. I gritted my teeth together to keep my illogical terror from showing. That's all right, he shrugged. It can wait. I sighed. Show me the damn ring, Edward. He shook his head. No. I studied his expression for a long minute. Please? I asked quietly, experimenting with my newly discovered weapon. I touched his face lightly with the tips of my fingers. Please, can I see it? His eyes narrowed. You are the most dangerous creature I've ever met, he muttered, but he got up and moved with unconscious grace to kneel next to the small bedside table. He was back on the bed with me in an instant, sitting beside me with one arm around my shoulder. In his other hand was a little black box. He balanced it on my left knee. Go ahead and take a look, he said brusquely. It was harder than it should have been to pick up the inoffensive little box, but I didn't want to hurt him again, so I tried to keep my hand from shaking. The surface was smooth with black satin. I brushed my fingers over it, hesitating. You didn't spend a lot of money, did you? Lie to me if you did. I didn't spend anything, he assured me. It's just another hand-me-down. This is the ring my father gave to my mother. Oh. Surprise colored my voice. I pinched the lid between my thumb and forefinger, but I didn't open it. I suppose it's a little outdated. His tone was playfully apologetic. Old-fashioned, just like me. I can get you something more modern. Something from Tiffany's. I like old-fashioned things, I mumbled as I hesitantly lifted the lid. Nestled into the black satin, Elizabeth Mason's ring sparkled in the dim light. The face was a long oval, set with slanting rows of glittering round stones. The band was gold, delicate and narrow. The gold made a fragile web around the diamonds. I'd never seen anything like it. Unthinkingly, I stroked the shimmering gems. It's so pretty, I murmured to myself, surprised. Do you like it? It's beautiful, I shrugged, feigning a lack of interest. It's not to like. He chuckled. See if it fits. My left hand clenched into a fist. Bella, he sighed. I'm not going to solder it to your finger. Just try it on. I can see if it needs to be sized. Then you can take it right off. Fine, I grumbled. I reached for the ring, but his long fingers beat me there. He took my left hand in his and slid the ring into place on my third finger. He held my hand out, and we both examined the oval sparkling against my skin. It wasn't quite as awful as I'd feared having it there. A perfect fit, he said indifferently. That's nice. Saves me a trip to the jeweler's. I could hear some strong emotion burning under the casual tone of his voice, and I stared up at his face. It was there in his eyes too, visible despite the careful nonchalance of his expression. You like that, don't you? I asked suspiciously, fluttering my fingers and thinking that it was really too bad that I had not broken my left hand. He shrugged his shoulders. Sure, he said, still casual. It looks very nice on you. I stared into his eyes, trying to decipher the emotion that smoldered just under the surface. He gazed back, and the casual pretense suddenly slipped away. He was glowing, his angel's face brilliant with joy and victory. He was so glorious that it knocked me breathless. Before I could catch that breath, he was kissing me, his lips exultant. I was lightheaded when he moved his mouth to whisper in my ear, but his breathing was just as ragged as mine. Yes, I like it. You have no idea. I laughed, gasping a little. I believe you. Do you mind if I do something? He murmured, his arms tightening around me. Anything you want. But he let me go and slid away. Anything but that, I complained. He ignored me, taking my hand and pulling me off the bed too. He stood in front of me, hands on my shoulders, face serious. Now, I want to do this right. Please keep in mind that you've already agreed to this, and don't ruin it for me. Oh no, I gasped as he slid down onto one knee. Be nice, he muttered. I took a deep breath. Isabella Swan? He looked up at me through his impossibly long lashes, his golden eyes soft but somehow still scorching. I promise to love you forever, every single day of forever. Will you marry me? There were many things I wanted to say, some of them not nice at all, and others more disgustingly gooey and romantic than he probably dreamed I was capable of. Rather than embarrass myself with either, I whispered, yes. Thank you, he said simply. He took my left hand and kissed each of my fingertips before he kissed the ring that was now mine. I hated to waste any part of the night in sleep, but that was inevitable. The sun was bright outside the window wall when I woke, with small clouds scuttling too quickly across the sky. The wind rocked the treetops till the whole forest looked as if it was going to shake apart. He left me alone to get dressed, and I appreciated the chance to think. Somehow, my plan for last night had gone horribly awry, and I needed to come to grips with the consequences. Though I had given back the hand-me-down ring as soon as I could do it without hurting his feelings, my left hand felt heavier, like it was still in place, just invisible. This shouldn't bother me, I reasoned. It was no big thing. A road trip to Vegas. I would go one better than old jeans. I would wear old sweats. The ceremony certainly couldn't take very long. No more than 15 minutes at most, right? I could handle that. And then, when it was over, he'd have to fulfill his side of the bargain. I would concentrate on that and forget the rest. He said I didn't have to tell anyone, and I was planning to hold him to that. Of course, it was very stupid of me not to think of Alice. The Cullens got home around noon. There was a new business-like feel to the atmosphere around them, and it pulled me back into the enormity of what was coming. Alice seemed to be in an unusually bad mood. I chalked it up to her frustration with feeling normal, because her first words to Edward were a complaint about working with the wolves. I think, she made a face as she used the uncertain word, that you're going to want to pack for cold weather, Edward. I can't see where you are exactly, because you're taking off with that dog this afternoon. But the storm that's coming seems particularly bad in that general area. Edward nodded. It's going to snow on the mountains, she warned him. Ooh, snow, I muttered to myself. It was June, for crying out loud. Wear a jacket, Alice told me. Her voice was unfriendly, and that surprised me. I tried to read her face, but she turned away. I looked at Edward, and he was smiling. Whatever was bugging Alice amused him. Edward had more than enough camping gear to choose from. Props in the human charade. The Cullens were good customers at the Newton store. He grabbed a down sleeping bag, a small tent, and several packets of dehydrated food, grinning when I made a face at them, and stuffed them all in a backpack. Alice wandered into the garage while we were there, watching Edward's preparations without a word. He ignored her. When he was done packing, Edward handed me his phone. Why don't you call Jacob, tell him we'll be ready for him in an hour or so. He knows where to meet us. Jacob wasn't home, but Billy promised to call around until he could find an available werewolf to pass the news to. Don't you worry about Charlie, Bella, Billy said. I've got my part of this under control. Yeah, I know, Charlie will be fine. I didn't feel so confident about his son's safety, but I didn't add that. I wish I could be with the rest of them tomorrow, Billy chuckled regretfully. Being an old man is a hardship, Bella. The urge to fight must be a defining characteristic of the Y chromosome. They were all the same. Have fun with Charlie. Good luck, Bella, he answered. And pass that along to the, Cullens for me. I will, I promised, surprised by the gesture. As I gave the phone back to Edward, I saw that he and Alice were having some kind of silent discussion. She was staring at him, pleading in her eyes. He was frowning back, unhappy with whatever she wanted. Billy said to tell you good luck. That was generous of him, Edward said, breaking away from her. Bella, could I please speak to you alone? Alice asked swiftly. You're about to make my life harder than it needs to be, Alice, Edward warned her through his teeth. I'd really rather you didn't. This isn't about you, Edward, she shot back. He laughed. Something about her response was funny to him. It's not, Alice insisted. This is a female thing. He frowned. Let her talk to me, I told him. I was curious. You asked for it, he muttered. He laughed again, half angry, half amused, and strode out of the garage. I turned to Alice, worried now, but she didn't look at me. Her bad mood hadn't passed yet. She went to sit on the hood of her Porsche, her face dejected. I followed and leaned against the bumper beside her. Bella? Alice asked in a sad voice, shifting over and curling up against my side. Her voice sounded so miserable that I wrapped my arms around her shoulders in comfort. What's wrong, Alice? Don't you love me? She asked in that same sad tone. Of course I do, you know that. Then why do I see you sneaking off to Vegas to get married without inviting me? Oh, I muttered, my cheeks turning pink. I could see that I had seriously hurt her feelings, and I hurried to defend myself. You know how I hate to make a big deal out of things. It was Edward's idea anyway. I don't care whose idea it was. How could you do this to me? I expect that kind of thing from Edward, but not from you. I love you like you're my own sister. To me, Alice, you are my sister. Words, she growled. Fine, you can come. There won't be much to see. She was still grimacing. What? I demanded. How much do you love me, Bella? Why? She stared at me with pleading eyes, her long black eyebrows slanting up in the middle and pulling together, her lips trembling at the corners. It was a heartbreaking expression. Please, 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 she whispered. Please, Bella, please, if you really love me, please let me do your wedding. Oh, Alice, I groaned, pulling away and standing up. No, don't do this to me. If you really, truly love me, Bella. I folded my arms across my chest. That is so unfair, and Edward kind of already used that on me. I'll bet Edward would like it better if you did this traditionally, though he'd never tell you that. And Esme, think what it would mean to her. I groaned. I'd rather face the newborns alone. I'll owe you for a decade. You'd owe me for a century. Her eyes glowed. Is that a yes? No, I don't want to do this. You won't have to do anything but walk a few yards and then repeat after the minister. Oh, please, she started bouncing in place. Please, 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 please. I'll never ever forgive you for this, Alice. Yay, she squealed, clapping her hands together. That's not a yes, but it will be, she sang. Edward, I yelled, stalking out of the garage. I know you're listening, get over here. Alice was right behind me, still clapping. Thanks so much, Alice, Edward said acidly, coming from behind me. I turned to let him have it, but his expression was so worried and upset that I couldn't speak my complaints. I threw my arms around him instead, hiding my face, just in case the angry moisture in my eyes made it look like I was crying. Vegas, Edward promised in my ear. Not a chance, Alice gloated. Bella would never do that to me. You know, Edward, as a brother, you're sometimes a disappointment. Don't be mean, I grumbled at her. He's trying to make me happy, unlike you. I'm trying to make you happy too, Bella. It's just that I know better what will make you happy, in the long run. You'll thank me for this. Maybe not for 50 years, but definitely someday. I never thought I'd see the day where I'd be willing to take a bet against you, Alice, but it has arrived. She laughed her silvery laugh. So, are you going to show me the ring? I grimaced in horror as she grabbed my left hand and then dropped it just as quickly. Huh, I saw him put it on you. Did I miss something? She asked. She concentrated for a half a second, furrowing her brow before she answered her own questions. No, wedding's still on. Bella has issues with jewelry, Edward explained. What's one more diamond? Well, I guess the ring has lots of diamonds, but my point is that he's already got one on... Enough, Alice. Edward cut her off suddenly. The way he glared at her, he looked like a vampire again. We're in a hurry. I don't understand. What's that about diamonds? I asked. We'll talk about it later, Alice said. Edward's right. You'd better get going. You've got to set a trap and make camp before the storm comes. She frowned, and her expression was anxious, almost nervous. Don't forget your coat, Bella. It seems unseasonably cold. I've already got it, Edward assured her. Have a nice night, she told us in farewell. It was twice as far to the clearing as usual. Edward took a long detour, making sure my scent would be nowhere near the trail Jacob would hide later. He carried me in his arms, the bulky backpack in my usual spot. He stopped at the farthest end of the clearing and set me on my feet. All right, just walk north for a ways, touching as much as you can. Alice gave me a clear picture of their path. It won't take long for us to intersect it. North? He smiled and pointed out the right direction. I wandered into the woods, leaving the clear yellow light of the strangely sunny day in the clearing behind me. Maybe Alice's blurred sight would be wrong about the snow. I hoped so. The sky was mostly clear, though the wind whipped furiously through the open spaces. In the trees, it was much calmer, but much too cold for June. Even in a long-sleeved shirt with a thick sweater over the top, there were goosebumps on my arms. I walked slowly, trailing my fingers over anything close enough. The rough tree bark, the wet ferns, the moss-covered rocks. Edward stayed with me, walking a parallel line about 20 yards away. Am I doing this right? I called. Perfectly. I had an idea. Will this help? I asked as I ran my fingers through my hair and caught a few loose strands. I draped them over the ferns. Yes, it does make the trail stronger, but you don't need to pull your hair out, Bella. It'll be fine. I've got a few extras I can spare. It was gloomy under the trees, and I wished I could walk closer to Edward and hold his hand. I wedged another hair into a broken branch that cut through my path. You don't need to let Alice have her way, you know, Edward said. Don't worry about it, Edward. I'm not going to leave you at the altar regardless. I had a sinking feeling that Alice was going to get her way, mostly because she was totally unscrupulous when there was something she wanted, and also because I was a sucker for guilt trips. That's not what I'm worried about. I want this to be what you want it to be. I repressed a sigh. It would hurt his feelings if I told the truth, that it didn't really matter, because it was all just varying degrees of awful anyway. Well, even if she does get her way, we can keep it small, just us. Emmett can get a clerical license off the internet. I giggled. That does sound better. Wouldn't feel very official if Emmett read the vows, which was a plus. I'd have a hard time keeping a straight face. See, he said with a smile. There's always a compromise. This was an interesting episode. I quite liked the interplay between Bella and Edward during this one because as much as I've enjoyed this book, and it's up there with the first one as being my favourite so far, we have missed a little bit of their relationship in this one because we've been so focused on this vampire-werewolf alliance, this newborn army that is coming. It feels more like an action movie with characters in that we like. Equally, we have been getting some nice depth to the characters here and there, but what we haven't seen is a progression of the Bella and Edward relationship, and we haven't had as many of these quiet moments with them. I'm a sucker for the romance, what can I say? I enjoy it when it's just the two of them interacting. It's also very fun to read for them, so it was nice to get a bit of that today. But also, what really stood out to me, this week I'd been thinking to myself between episodes, I'm not really seeing Edward's red flags. We're seeing a lot of red flags and sort of toxic, in air quotes, things from Jacob recently, but not so much from Edward. He's kind of been a picture-perfect boyfriend / future husband to Bella during, I believe, the entirety of this book. And then we got the moment with the charm, and there was that little bit of a jealousy and the unfairness and the kind of the way that he spoke to her in that. But I'm not going to crucify him for it because that's relationship sometimes. There's, like what happened here at the very end of this reading, compromise. There's conversations about things. Bella can't be the only one to express herself and to get her way. I mean, she admitted in this very part of the reading that she just manipulated him to get what she wants, and she feels like a bad person over it, you know? So we also have to be understanding of Edward being a little bit upset about her wearing this charm all the time from this guy that's kissed her without permission when she has refused gift after gift from him. Does it make it right? No. Do we wish that all relationships and people were perfect? Yes, but that wouldn't make for very interesting reading. So it's nice to have them both be kind of bad people every now and again, because isn't that human? Especially in a book that's dealing with werewolves and vampires, it's nice to have some humanity. But I hope you won't judge me too harshly for not judging Edward too harshly. I will also admit that I like this character a lot, and I probably have a blind spot when it comes to some of his worst behaviour, of which I still don't see, but we'll discuss that fully once we're all done and we get into it like a little book club ending, because I'm definitely going to be making at least some recordings and probably some videos on this series when I'm done, but more on that later. We are 68% of the way through Eclipse, and we will be continuing on with this next week. Thank you so much for joining me. Of course, let me know what you think in a comment on the Patreon without spoilers, please, for people who haven't read it before. So anything that comes next, don't bring that up. But until then, thank you, and good night.